Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're tackling something really disturbing, the alleged use of chemical weapons by Bashar al-Assad's regime in Syria. We're going to try and unpack the secrets, the accountability questions, the cover-ups, really the human cost.
Which is immense.
Absolutely. And for this deep dive, we've looked at a whole range of sources: history, international investigations, survivor stories.
Yeah, a broad spectrum.
Our goal isn't just the headlines. We want to get into the nuances, maybe understand the why behind it all.
And that context is just so vital here. We're talking about alleged actions inside this devastating civil war.
Right.
And these allegations, they have huge implications for how the world sees and, well, responds to these kinds of atrocities.
Okay, let's start back at the beginning then. Bashar al-Assad, he takes power in 2000, right, after his father Hafez ruled for decades.
Correct.
And there was this initial feeling, wasn't there, that he might be different, a reformer maybe?
There definitely was that image pushed, yeah. Talk of modernization, opening things up a bit.
But that didn't really last, did it?
Well, looking back, you can see signs pretty early on. His appointments, some decrees, they hinted that consolidating power, his own and his inner circles, like his brother Mar, was the real game plan.
Through suppression.
Exactly. Suppression, intimidation. It kind of laid the groundwork, this authoritarian foundation for what came later.
Which brings us to 2011, the Arab Spring. Protests kick off in Syria, calling for reforms.
And they escalate fast, very fast, into full-blown civil war.
How did the regime's first reaction to those protests set the stage for, well, for the chemical weapons allegations later?
The response to the initial peaceful protests was just incredibly brutal, excessive force right from the start.
No engagement.
No, it was a violent crackdown, military force against civilians, and that violence, it didn't just fuel the war's escalation.
It showed a willingness.
Exactly, a willingness to use unrestrained force against their own people. It set a terrible precedent, and arguably, it made using chemical weapons seem like a possible, though obviously horrifying, next step to keep control.
Then we get to 2013, Ghouta. That name just instantly means horror.
It does.
Can you walk us through what happened? Why was it such a turning point?
August 2013, Ghouta. The evidence points overwhelmingly to sarin gas.
Sarin, nerve agent.
Yes, delivered by rockets. The result, hundreds dead, civilians, so many children, the sheer scale.
And the images were just
unbelievable. Eyewitness accounts, video, choking, convulsions. Hospitals completely overwhelmed. It was shocking. It definitely grabbed the world's attention. Even if the follow-through was limited.
Right, the international response. It was messy.
Understatement.
You had UN investigations suggesting the regime was responsible, Syria denying everything, and then Obama's red line.
That infamous red line on chemical weapons.
Yeah.
The UN investigations did present compelling evidence, according to many experts, but Syria and Russia just dismissed it.
So the expectation was U.S. military action.
It seemed that way, but it was averted. Russia stepped in, brokered a deal.
The deal for Syria to give up its chemical weapons stockpile?
Exactly. Syria agreed to declare and surrender its arsenal. It was hailed by some as diplomacy working, but critics argued it let the regime off the hook, avoided real accountability, and maybe, just maybe, allowed them to hide some of their capabilities.
Because the attacks didn't stop.
No, they didn't. Which leads us to the next phase.
After 2013, the reports shift. More about chlorine gas now, often in barrel bombs.
That's right.
Why the change? And what was the effect of these attacks?
Well, chlorine, it's still a banned chemical weapon, let's be clear. But it's not a nerve agent like sarin. Less instantly lethal on a mass scale, perhaps.
So why use it?
Several possible reasons. Maybe they still had easier access to chlorine or its precursors. Maybe they calculated cynically that it wouldn't trigger the same level of international outrage as sarin did.
Less likely to cross that red line again.
Perhaps. But make no mistake, these chlorine attacks, often from crude barrel bombs just rolled out of helicopters, they were devastating.
How so?
Horrific injuries, severe breathing problems, chemical burns. And the psychological impact, living under the constant fear of these indiscriminate attacks falling from the sky, it became this terrifying reality in opposition areas.
Do we have specific examples?
Oh, absolutely. Places like Douma, Khan Shaykhun, Ladamina, numerous documented attacks. We have testimony from survivors, from doctors, describing the choking, the burning lungs, the long-term health effects, too.
So amid these ongoing attacks, how did the world try to investigate? That's the OPCW's job, right? Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons.
Yes, the OPCW is the main international body for this. But their work in Syria has been incredibly difficult.
How so? What challenges did they face?
Huge challenges. Getting access to attack sites often involved massive delays. There were serious security risks for the inspectors on the ground.
And obstruction.
And outright obstruction from the Syrian government, yes. Despite all that, the OPCW did produce reports. And many of them pointed the finger squarely at Assad's forces for multiple attacks.
But Syria and Russia just deny it all.
Consistently, they claim the evidence is fabricated or that rebels staged the attacks. It's a constant refrain.
And this plays out at the UN, too.
Definitely. At the UN Security Council, Russia primarily has used its veto power again and again to block resolutions that would hold Syria accountable for using chemical weapons.
Veto power. That's the 5 permanent members, right? China, France, Russia, UK, US.
Correct. Any one of them can block a resolution, and Russia's protection has been absolutely key for Assad.
It's easy to get sort of bogged down in the geopolitics, the acronyms.
It is.
But we need to remember the human cost. Let's bring it back to the people, the victims.
Yeah, absolutely essential. Because behind every allegation, every report, there are real people suffering unimaginable things.
What does that look like on the ground?
It looks like survivors living with chronic health problems, breathing difficulties, skin conditions. Years later, it's families mourning loved ones killed in the most horrific ways.
And the medics.
Medics working in bombed-out clinics with almost no supplies, trying to treat victims while sometimes becoming victims themselves. The psychological trauma is immense, too, living with that constant fear. It scars entire communities.
Children, especially.
Children have suffered terribly, orphaned, disabled, their lives just shattered. And you have to remember, hospitals and clinics were often deliberately targeted in Syria, making it even harder to get help for anything, let alone a chemical attack.
And while all this is happening, the Assad regime is actively denying it, pushing counter-narratives.
Very actively. It's a pretty sophisticated denial and disinformation strategy.
What does that involve?
State media constantly pumps out stories blaming rebel groups, saying they staged the attacks to frame the government. Or they just deny the attacks happened at all.
And they target groups like the White Helmets.
Yes, there's been a persistent campaign trying to discredit the White Helmets, the volunteer rescue workers claiming they faked evidence or even carried out attacks. Completely baseless, but persistent.
And social media plays a role.
A big role. Pro-regime accounts, probably state-backed trolls too, spread these narratives online, muddying the waters, trying to create doubt about what actually happened.
So you have all this evidence, UN reports, OPCW findings, survivor testimony, yet real accountability seems so far off. Why? What's blocking the path to justice?
It's a frustrating mix of things. Geopolitics is huge. Russia and Iran's unwavering support for Assad shields him politically and militarily. That makes action through channels like the UN Security Council basically impossible.
But there are other routes. Legal routes.
Human rights groups are trying. They're pushing cases in European courts using universal jurisdiction.
Universal jurisdiction.
Yeah.
That's where courts can prosecute certain major crimes like war crimes, even if they happen elsewhere.
Exactly. It allows prosecution regardless of where the crime occurred or the nationality of perpetrators or victims. But these cases are incredibly complex. They take years and face huge legal hurdles.
So overall, the international response has been lacking.
Largely, yes. There hasn't been a unified, decisive response strong enough to enforce accountability. Which leads to a really disturbing question.
Which is?
Has the world, maybe without intending to, started to normalize the use of chemical weapons in some situations by failing to act decisively here?
That's a chilling thought. And beyond the lack of justice, what's the long-term legacy of all this alleged chemical warfare in Syria?
It's multifaceted and deeply concerning. Environmentally, you have potential contamination of land, water, which could mean future health crises.
And for warfare itself.
Arguably, it's eroded the global taboo against chemical weapons, that long-standing norm, that prohibition. It feels weaker now. It could make their use seem more possible, more thinkable in future conflicts, which is incredibly dangerous.
And for Syrian society.
The deepest scars are there, the trauma, the mistrust, the sheer challenge of rebuilding lives and communities after experiencing this kind of horror. It's immense.
So looking forward now. The conflict isn't over. Assad is still in power. Are there still efforts to deal with the chemical weapons issue, to get justice?
The immediate global spotlight might have dimmed a bit, with other crises flaring up. But yes, work continues. Documenting evidence, legal efforts, diplomatic discussions, they haven't stopped entirely.
And what are the big lessons here? What should the world learn from this?
Oh, some hard lessons. It shows how fragile international norms are when powerful states decide to ignore them or protect those who do. It highlights just how difficult accountability is during active conflict.
And the need for.
A much stronger, more unified international will to enforce the rules, to act decisively when chemical weapons are used, regardless of the political complexities. Preventing this from becoming normal requires real commitment to international law, real consequences for perpetrators.
This has been a really sobering deep dive into these deeply troubling allegations about chemical weapons in Syria. We've covered Assad's rise, the horrific attacks like Ghouta, the shift to chlorine, the maze of
The
investigations,
denials, the disinformation.
and above all, the human cost. The key takeaways are pretty stark, aren't they? Repeated alleged use of banned weapons, a complicated, often gridlocked international response, accountability proving incredibly elusive.
And just profound, lasting suffering for the Syrian people.
It leaves us with a final, unsettling question, I think. When you see these alleged atrocities, and the world struggles so much to deliver justice, what does that tell us? About the future of international law, about our collective ability to stop chemical warfare from becoming just another tactic.
A question that demands reflection.
It really does. Something for all of us and for you listening to keep thinking about. Thank you for joining us on